Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Kayla Girgen is a registered dietitian, certified personal trainer, and founder of Sugar and Strength Academy, an online wellness community helping women balance blood sugar and build strength one step at a time. She blends real life tools like continuous glucose monitoring and accessible movement like rucking to help clients break free from diet extremes and feel strong, both physically and mentally. Kayla's approach centers on progress over perfection and creating results that work in real life. Her upcoming book, Ruck Fit, Build Strength and Endurance by Walking with Weight, shares how rucking became a catalyst for reclaiming her physical and mental health, proving that fitness doesn't have to be complicated to be life-changing. Her book helps readers understand how to get started with basic guidelines for beginners, answers to common questions, safety tips, and more advanced strategies to help maximize fitness goals. It surveys gear and gadgets, including packs, plates, footwear, and more, and offers sample training plans designed to put readers on the road to better mobility, greater aerobic fitness, strength, and even competitive challenges. Kayla Girgen, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you just follow me around and read my bio for me?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If
Yes,
you're
you do a
feeling
much better job with my bio and explaining the book. I feel like I freeze when I get oh, tell me about your book. And I'm like, I don't know where to start.
exactly. No, I've always contended that we would all have much better lives if anytime we entered a room, somebody would read our bio and like that only highlighted all the best things. So if any point in this conversation you're feeling down on yourself, let me know. I'll reread the introduction for you, and we'll be
Perfect.
back on
I
track.
I appreciate a good pep talk. Yeah.
Well, that introduction went a lot better than the first try of the introduction. I sounded like I had emphysema, so we had to throw that in the bin. But we did better the second time. So,
Yes.
yeah. But judging by your bio, you've had a really interesting and successful career. I'm really looking forward to this book upcoming, all about rucking, which is getting really, really popular these days. And I don't know of any other resources like the one that you've created. Are there many other books that you're aware of at this point that actually talk about rucking, specifically as far as like the fitness and mental benefits?
Definitely not to this degree. I would say just from some of the research that I did, I feel like you might find like maybe closer to a pamphlet on Amazon for a few dollars, but I feel like maybe some of the literature that I've seen was like maybe 50 pages max, and certainly not to this degree where you're, seeing how you can use your ruck as your training buddy or really how to scale things up. I think because rucking has military origins, I think for a lot of like lay people or civilians, it's very intimidating. So really my goal was to have something that's digestible and really help people like meet them where they're at and show them how they can use rucking versus, seeing somebody carrying 75 pounds and going through the mud or something. It's like, okay, how can we really translate this to everyday life?
Yeah, no, I love that. And like I said, it's becoming more popular. I go on my morning walks every day around the lake near my house, and I'm starting to see more and more packs, people using them a little bit more. And so I think it's great that it's catching on. I can also see some potential pitfalls. We mentioned in the introduction if somebody's not using it properly or they're using maybe too much or too little weight. So I'm really, really looking forward to the book, and I know it's going to be a really helpful and practical guide for people out there.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
That's awesome. Before we dive into the content of your book, I did want to talk about your interest in nutrition, specifically why you wanted to become a registered dietitian. And we also mentioned continuous glucose monitoring. So always an exciting topic that we love discussing and learning about. But I wanted to get a little bit more of your own personal story and how your interest kind of evolved as far as nutrition and personal training and all that.
Yeah, I love this question because I think a lot of us in the fitness space, we tend to, I think, find ourselves in fitness and helping others because we struggled ourselves. And I would say that story is really no different for me. I think my me search is really what led me on research. And I had no idea what a registered dietitian was. I was actually training for my personal training certification and going through those studies. And then I found out, like, oh, I suppose I can't really like prescribe macros or whatever it is. And that's really where I saw like how food could make a big difference. And I ended up kind of pivoting and going that direction. I still hold both certifications. And I think more recently using CGM has really transformed like how I think about food and how my clients really transform their relationship with food, because I think we're just conditioned to think that eat less, move more, and we get really caught up in numbers, whether it's counting macros, counting grams of protein, and we don't really get to see that reverberation of like the diet quality. For example, like even some of those healthy foods can send your blood sugar spiking and tanking, and oftentimes your energy and your mood follows that. So I think what I find is when we're able to study people's blood sugar, they're able to do all of the things. They have, they're sleeping better. They have the energy to work out or maybe do some meal prep. So to help emphasize or take the focus off of numbers and then really kind of connect that tool of continuous glucose monitoring to that natural intuition. I think we kind of lose that over time when we're trying to abide by a certain plan or again follow certain macros. We tend to lose sight of like, am I actually hungry or full? Like, how is my food making me feel? And that just helps connect the dots again.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. For somebody, I would imagine most of our listeners and people watching already know what a continuous glucose monitor is. For somebody who maybe has never heard of that, maybe they even understand like what it's like to prick their finger and check their blood glucose. Can you explain what a continuous glucose monitor is and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. It is basically a little device or sensor. It'll sit on the back of your arm. That's where most people wear them. There are some that go on your abdomen as well. That's probably not like as popular. But if
Interesting.
you see somebody with a little device on the back of their arm, it really started out helping people with diabetes manage their blood sugar. But I think in terms of the bigger scope of metabolic health, we're seeing how I think anyone can benefit from this. And I think we'd prevent a lot of things if people had access to this tool. Thankfully, there are more out-of-pocket options too. You don't need a prescription, thankfully, as of about a year ago. And compared to, like you said, the finger pricks, basically a CGM is checking your blood sugar about every 5 minutes, 5 to 15 minutes, depending on your sensor. And that really gives you some real-time data that you can use because otherwise we can't see a lot of those things, or you're doing finger pricks all of the time. And maybe to take a step back, when your blood sugar is more steady, again, your energy, your appetite become better managed. You don't have uncontrollable cravings oftentimes, especially for carbs and sugar. And I think oftentimes weight loss becomes a byproduct of you feeling better from the inside out versus the other way around.
Yeah.
And the sensors usually last a couple of weeks. So I actually have one on right now. There's a couple things that I want to test. I will say it's not something that you have to wear 24/7, 365. And in fact, I probably don't recommend that. I see usually with the folks that I work with, I see two camps of people. Some people really love to wear a CGM 24/7. They love that they can look at the app on their phone where it's kind of picking up all of that information and they can see, okay, no wonder why like my energy is crashing or like I am just like ravenous right now. They can connect the dots there. But then I see the other end where it's taken to the extreme, and some people get really anxious just knowing I had X food, it's going to make me feel like this or make my blood sugar do that. So I tend to see, some people do really well when they have two or three sensors, and then we can build a framework off of that so they're not getting fixated on the numbers.
I really like that you mentioned that. It's not something you have to use forever, but like for yourself, like a period of testing things out, sampling some things, gathering data, that kind of thing. I'll often use the analogy of like testing your blood glucose by sticking your finger is almost like taking a snapshot of the freeway. You don't necessarily know like what time that photo is taken. There could be lots of traffic or not a lot of traffic, but if you're watching, a video of the freeway and you've got the understanding of when there's more traffic and less traffic, you can kind of determine patterns a little bit easier. Would you say that's a fair comparison?
I love that comparison. I think that's a great snapshot. And I think too, like oftentimes your blood sugar and your CGM aren't going to match 100%, but what's more important is the trends. So regardless of what those numbers are, you can still monitor trends, like how high you're going, how fast you're crashing. And that I think that's more helpful too, versus focusing on one specific number. And I think that goes with any blood work. It's like when you get one lab, it's not very helpful but when you can see that big picture and trends over time, that's really where we can see and make interventions.
I love that. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. What have you noticed? This is a very general question, so obviously there's going to be lots of individuality here. But how much do you have to directly coach somebody who's using a CGM versus like they just kind of pick up on things on their own and they kind of find the foods that work best for them?
Yeah, this is me being a lazy coach. I feel like the nice thing about CGM is it helps me do some of my job for me. I think more importantly that it gives feedback and it makes behavior change a lot more engaging, a lot more motivating. I will say there are some like foods and lifestyle where certainly I'm coaching and not just being a lazy coach. But I think it just helps again motivate people because as fitness professionals, I think we can give advice, give advice, give advice and encouragement. But oftentimes I think people need to be ready to to change. And when they have that visual data, it's very motivating. And for other things that we can't see, so sure, we can see food, but I also see like what one night of bad sleep does and what stress does. That I think surprises a lot of people when they had like a stressful encounter at work and all of a sudden their blood sugar soaring without even having had any food. And that makes some of those lifestyle factors, I think, a lot easier to intervene on when we actually have data that we can work from.
Yeah, and you've already alluded to this, but can you talk a little bit about the quality of life between somebody who has that swinging up and down blood sugar all day, every day, versus the person where it's like just a little bit more muted and just kind of gradually rising and gradually falling? Can you compare like what life looks like on those two contrasting?
Yeah, and I will say that it's not a goal to have like a flatline glucose. I don't think that's healthy. To give like listeners a visual, I would say if you imagine mountain peaks, like we want to avoid those sharp like rises and sharp drops. And then think of like you said, more rolling hills is really our goal. It's normal to have those ebbs and flows, but somebody that's kind of spiking and crashing all day long, a lot of times they feel really tired. They're ravenous. They can't make it maybe more than a couple of hours without eating. So they're always thinking about food. Usually they're reaching for like carbs or sugar or something that's going to bring their blood sugar back up. I would say a lot of times they're just like riddled with inflammation. So they see more joint pain oftentimes. Mood, again, is another one that tends to follow as well, versus someone who is, has more steady blood sugar. I would say they make it for much longer between meals, which from a weight loss perspective, I feel like you're able to maybe tap into those fat stores a little bit more. So they're able to see more weight loss without white knuckling it all day long too. Plus, again, you're sleeping better. A lot of times from like a movement standpoint, we can see, are you tanking mid-workout? Like how can we use CGM to help your performance too? Because I do see oftentimes, especially someone with insulin resistance, where I work with a lot of women who have PCOS, we have to be thoughtful about how we're, incorporating some sort of like intra or pre-workout meal just to help them perform at their peak too, so they get the most of their workout.
Okay, awesome. And then I would assume, again, most of the listeners would probably know this, but the foods that have the least impact on the blood sugar are going to be your fats and proteins, carbohydrates to some extent, but we need to be cautious about which kinds of carbohydrates people are including, correct?
Exactly, exactly. And I think a lot of people are surprised when they, we think that fruit, we're conditioned to think like fruit is a healthy snack between meals. And I do find a lot of people like fruit, yes, it's healthy, it's got fiber and vitamins and minerals, but it does, kind of wreak havoc on your blood sugar. So, for example, pairing something like that up with a protein or fat, like you mentioned, can make a world of difference too.
Yeah, I could not agree more with you. I will never, ever, ever tell somebody that fruit is bad for them. But I know like my motivation for being carnivore is when if I have fruit, I'm starving in 20, 30 minutes and I don't want more fruit. I want, junk food. I want chips. I want, a candy bar. Like junk food sounds good to me where it normally doesn't. And so it's not that I think fruit is bad. It's just for me, it drives this hunger and cravings, which is just like really uncomfortable once you moved on past that. So I agree with you.
And what's interesting too is like fruit, for example, a lot of times it's made of glucose. So you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, but fruit also has fructose, that fruit sugar, and we can't see that on CGM. So with CGM, you're only really getting a part of the picture. On top of that, we have fructose that's kind of hitting your liver. And again, fructose isn't like bad. It's just like how much the quantities that we get it in, oftentimes in like, things like soda or pop, for example. But I will say we don't get the full picture with fruit in particular, just because, again, you have a continuous glucose monitor, not a continuous fructose monitor.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I would refer anybody to the book by Dr. Richard Johnson, Why Nature Wants Us to Get Fat, where it talks about all the principles of fructose in particular and how it can drive aggressive behavior and definitely drives a lot of fat gain. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind too, that the fructose does not necessarily hit your blood sugar like glucose does. So thank you for all that. I think that's very, very helpful. You also have a bit of experience with bariatric surgeries, not that you're performing them, but you're working with people who have had different bariatric surgeries. So I'm just curious how you got involved in that and some of the things that you've learned around that.
Yeah, I will say that I started out, I worked as a clinical dietitian in a weight management clinic. And with that, we kind of oversaw like low calorie meal plans. And then we also had an arm of that clinic that also did bariatric surgery. And I think really what I noticed is the big support gap. So we saw a lot of support leading up to surgery and checking those boxes for insurance to cover surgery. Surgery happens. And then for a lot of people, that support really falls off. And you have surgery on your stomach or your intestines, but not your brain. And I think that's where I really I loved working with people on, their mindset about food. CGM again became a tool later that I started using when I started my own practice, just because I saw one of the complications was like hypoglycemia after bariatric surgery. It's not something that's really talked about a lot, but just because of the change of anatomy, a lot of times you're more vulnerable to blood sugar fluctuations. And with that, I feel like we've caught a lot of things or intervened, through dietary measures where people just are able to maybe, again, help facilitate further weight loss or maybe help take off regain, help maintain weight long term.
So that was going to be my next question, actually, was the long term. You typically hear the story that somebody gets the surgery done, it works. It works great for like a year, 2 years, and then people just kind of start this slow like regain over time. What has been your experience as far as like compliance and or long-term success with somebody who's had a bariatric surgery?
Yeah, I will say it's not the easy way out. There's a lot of work involved, like in the pre-surgery requisites, but then also post-op. I think I see most people successful when they have a great support team. So usually a dietitian they can trust. Maybe they're working with a therapist as well, just around some of those like emotional components around food. And then they have a doctor as well who's kind of monitoring their blood work. I would say people don't come to me when things are like happy, people don't come to me when things are going well. But usually when I see people, they either like they're stuck and they want to get like that last 10, 15, 20 off, or maybe they've experienced some of that regain. And a couple habits that I really see contributing to that. And I would say this goes for like general population, not just people who've had bariatric surgery, but I see a lot of like grazing and snacking tendencies, whether that's, a blood sugar issue or psychological habits around food. So we try to tease a lot of that out. So I would say long-term success, it really, I think, is having that support network. And I think checking in with even, say, like your surgical team, because being in the clinic, it got to be a point where I was looking at, a medical chart and I was like, okay, this patient in particular has gained 40 pounds. I can see from their other visits, they're probably not going to show up today. And sure enough, I think part of that is just like, kind of facing the music, showing up and getting the support that you need.
Yeah, that's interesting. That support sounds really, really helpful. And it sounds like a big, I guess, reason that somebody would be successful long term would be more around that like mental and emotional kind of side of things, having that support to, you know, deal with some of the eating issues that cause the obesity to begin with might be really helpful. And I'm wondering, with the snacking that you see, is that just because the volume of somebody who's gone through bariatric surgery, they have a different like kind of volume, so they can't eat nearly as much at one time? Is that part of what's driving that?
Exactly. And that's kind of the mechanism of surgery is you get a smaller stomach. A lot of times like 80% of your stomach is removed, but I would say over time like within maybe 6 to 18 months post-op, usually like my goal is to like for lack of a better term like have you eat normal again, like normal portions and just really again kind of work on food quality, not necessarily quantity, really kind of nab snacking, but I think a lot of times again for anybody who's wanted to lose weight, I feel like we've also been conditioned to think like, okay, you have to have breakfast right away in the morning, or you have to fuel your metabolism, so you have to eat small, frequent meals. And there is, not much other nutrition advice that really like makes me upset, but that is one of them, like eating small, frequent meals, because I think thinking about the scope of bariatric surgery, someone can really easily outrun that restriction or that benefit of surgery when they're eating small amounts throughout the day. And I think, again, for someone who hasn't had surgery, really one of the mechanisms that tells us we're full is getting a little bit of a stretch on your stomach. So volume becomes really important. I think like things like fiber, protein can really help with that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I told you off air that I used to work for a big corporation and I was managing the metabolic testing program where we were measuring metabolic rate on different people. And of course, we learned that, when people were doing lots of diets, they would reduce their metabolic rate. It was only through discovering, when people started doing like intermittent fasting or time restricted eating a little bit more, that you'd see the opposite effect in somebody's metabolism. Their metabolism would actually increase more than what we'd expect as a normal for somebody in a certain age, height, weight, and gender. So I'm assuming, like, have you noticed like any kind of like time restricted eating or like skipping breakfast? Maybe breakfast is not the most essential meal of the day. That fasting can help with that kind of thing, especially with people with bariatric surgeries.
I don't know if I saw it like with fasting in particular. I did do metabolic tests like you, like where you're blowing through the tube and then you
Yeah,
get the readout. It's
yeah,
always so interesting just to see because I always found that people were like, "What? My metabolism isn't slow? Like, why am I not
totally.
losing weight?"
Yeah,
And sometimes there were some big feels around that. But I will say I don't know about fasting in particular, but I think if you're fasting too much on the other end, or even any sort of like strict calorie restriction, when we see muscle loss, oftentimes we see that metabolic rate go up. So I think it's kind of what we're doing in that eating window too. So I would say if you are doing something like intermittent fasting, like making sure you're hitting your protein goals just to hold on to that muscle mass. So it's hard to say for fasting in particular, but I did find like a lot of people just felt better, maybe sticking to a certain eating window, whether that was like physically or psychologically. It was just nice to have like, okay, kitchen closes at this time. But again, I think sometimes it goes to the extreme where, oh my gosh, my window closes at 8 p.m. What if I get hungry after that? I'm going to eat everything now, and then you kind of overeat just so you're not hungry later. So it
yeah.
really depends on the person.
Cool. Yeah. No, I love that. And then how have GLP-1s kind of changed the scene in people with and without bariatric surgery? Is it a combination that some people can use, or yeah, in your opinion, like the rise of GLP-1s in the last few years, how has that changed the nutrition landscape? Do you think that they're successful? Are there lots of concerns? Is it both nuanced? Like, how do you see that?
Yeah, I would say it's an individual thing. I'm not like for or against them by any means. I would say that, one thing that I see, I would say like 40% of people I work with have either tried one or are currently on a GLP-1, and I've seen it like work wonders for so many people. Just like when that food noise is cleared, they're able to, I think, get some of those habits ingrained. But then I also see the other end of the spectrum where it's maybe used as kind of a crutch where, okay, I know I can get away with this, and I think that's natural human tendency to see can I still get results and see how much you can kind of get away with in there too? I will say my big concerns become getting protein if you are on a GLP-1. So eating protein and strength training, any sort of resistance training, those are really going to be the things that make sure that you're losing primarily fat versus muscle. Because I think now that we're seeing more studies circulating about just people losing up to 40% muscle with some of these medications. And like you were saying, in terms of like that yo-yoing, you can really change your body composition over time, and that can influence your metabolism big time.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so those are the most common things that I hear. And you mentioned a key word, which is food noise. It feels like these GLP-1s do a really good job eliminating or greatly reducing the food noise. And it seems as if people take that time when they're on it to really focus on some of the other strategies that you mentioned, eating lots of protein, making sure you're doing resistance training, that can kind of help change the habits so that if somebody does want to taper off, they usually have more of their lean mass with them and they can maintain a decent metabolic rate and be burning lots of calories all the time versus the person who did lose a lot of lean mass and now probably is going to have a reduced metabolic rate and is going to have a much tougher time maintaining a fat loss. Is that kind of the
Exactly.
way you understand it?
Yeah, yep, absolutely. You nailed it.
I would say if to add to that, I have had some clients who maybe haven't used GLP-1, but they feel like even using CGM, for example, like leveling out their blood sugar a little bit more, they feel like some of that food noise is cleared too, just more from a natural standpoint.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Well, we've been talking about strength training. You're also a certified personal trainer, and it sounds like you were going down that path before you got really interested in nutrition. Is that correct?
Yes, I feel like the two kind of always interweave. It's hard to pull them apart. But I think my path to be a personal trainer is really where I learned about become like what a dietitian was and what they did. And then I was like, okay, well, I was kind of going to be a trainer to do that. And now I should probably go this route. So, as you know, it takes like a lot of education between the two. So I ended up keeping both credentials just because really my like working in a sales job and kind of working in the corporate world, my personal training degree was what was going to get my foot out the door. And then I ended up going back to school to be a registered dietitian once I figured out like what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah, gotcha. What was your exercise history personally before you discovered Rucking?
Yeah, I probably not the healthiest. I would say I kind of like ebbed and flows. It was either all or nothing. And I really found this was before we got all our information on, social media or Instagram and TikTok, but I loved following like bodybuilding.com and any sort of like women's fitness or women's health magazine. So I feel like that's where a lot of my information was coming from, whether it was a training plan or nutrition. And I just got so much conflicting advice like, should I do HIIT? Should I do, strength training? Nutrition wise, it was the same. And I think that's really what led me on that path. And then I just really struggled with the extremes. I was either all in or all out. And I feel like I just, being a perfectionist kind of tendencies, I always like, once it wasn't perfect, then I would just throw in the towel and start next Monday. And then that's when I found rucking. So
Yeah,
that's, I think, what really, I think, helped both physically and emotionally.
got it. How did you find Rucking?
Yeah, I actually was listening to Peter Attia, the Drive podcast, and he had Michael Easter on. And then I bought Comfort Crisis, his book, and that's really where I learned a little bit more about rucking, and I just like wanted more of it. So I was kind of seeking information, and that's where I found I was like, there's not much information out here. And I think some of the research that we do have, it's so much like it has a lot of military origin. So we see like, healthy males carrying obscene amounts of weight, and that's where I really kind of started doing some interviews and looking at like how does this help the average person? Because initially I got into it just for the physical benefits. I was like, okay, well I can lean out, I can, get outside more. This was the midst of the pandemic, so we're all kind of like cooped up, and I think the emotional benefits were really what kept me in it. And just again, getting out of my head and getting outside was, more benefit even than the physical aspect of rucking.
I remember that exact episode of the Drive podcast. Wasn't Michael Easter? I believe he lives in Vegas. Wasn't he doing it like in the heat of the summer and like in the desert, like all the time, like in extreme weather?
Exactly, exactly. And now I think he finished like a 3 or 8. There's a big difference there. He just finished this like obscene long hike, so I'm excited to hear like what his next book is going to be.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, like I said, I remember that exact episode. You mentioned some of the physical benefits of rucking, but you've also alluded to this, and we alluded to this also in the introduction, that it was really good for you personally, mentally and emotionally. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I feel like just like struggling with anxiety. I feel like we're all like up in our heads, and a lot of us spend so much time indoors. I can't remember. It's like over 90% of our day is spent indoors, and I would say that's probably an underestimate for most people. And I think one, it just got me outside, and I was just like really able to connect with nature. Living in Minnesota, I feel like regardless of the season, it just like made me observe all of those things and just kind of reconnect in that aspect. It just helped with, I think, clear like mental clarity overall, just creativity, spending that time outside. But I will also say the social component. So what's nice about rucking is if you have, buddies or people that you want to work out with, you can really kind of even out. For example, if you have a friend who, maybe slows you down a little bit, but you really enjoy your time together, you can throw on a ruck with maybe a little bit more weight, and now you're still getting a good workout, but you're also getting that social component too. So I think that's one of my favorite things is just like getting outside, like putting our rucks on, like going for a ruck with my husband. And just like, I think there's research that if you're facing the same direction and walking the same way, it's great for just like conversations. You don't have screens that are distracting you. And I would say that's probably one of my favorite things.
So there is actually research on that.
I believe so. I can't remember. I linked it somewhere in the book. I talk about it, but I can't remember what
Awesome.
chapter.
Awesome. That's fine. No, that is great.
Yeah,
It's
it's great for
something.
conflict resolution. Yeah.
Totally. No, that's something I've always noticed. I'm not aware of any research that's been done on it, but I haven't looked. But that's definitely something that I noticed. Like in particular, I remember I would have to do like a weekly meeting with a manager, and he's behind a desk. I'm sitting in a small chair. He's sitting in a big chair. He's facing me. He's up above me, and it feels like conflict. And so I finally just asked him, like, look, dude, like we are spending way too much time inside. Both of us like to be outside. There's a park right next to the building. What can we just do a walking meeting? Like we don't need to sit here face to face. And that alone just felt so much better. Like you're moving. It feels like you're moving together, discussing problems, not like confrontational facing each other. That's something I've always noticed. It's so interesting.
Exactly. So it is fantastic. I think in the workplace, at home, and you just don't have any distractions either, which I feel like really gives you that like groundwork to be able to have some difficult conversations.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, back to the physical aspect. What is it about rucking physically that's so beneficial for people versus, say, go to a gym, do your traditional like strength training program? Obviously, you can do both is probably ideal, but what are some of the key differences that make rucking superior in certain ways in your mind?
Yeah, and I will say rucking, it's great
For building muscle and losing fat, you get that cardiovascular benefit, but it does not replace formal strength training. So I would say there's still, it's great for lower body strength. So being that you have like a ruck, so imagine like a backpack, for example, on your back, you might also see weighted vests. There is a little bit of a difference between the two that we can talk about. But I will say that you oftentimes get a stronger core. You get some of the posture benefits. So again, like being indoors, hunched over our laptops all the time, the ruck will straighten you out a little bit if you have your weight on your back. It's also great for bone density. So I think that that's something that we don't appreciate enough is just the importance of bone density as we age. And rucking is a weight bearing exercise. So it helps give that stimulus to your skeleton, especially thinking about like perimenopausal women or postmenopausal where that estrogen drops. A lot of time bone density can drop off as well. And thinking about a lot of folks that I work with having had weight loss surgery, losing obscene amounts of weight, oftentimes your bone density goes down, and rucking is something that can help counter some of that too.
Got it. When we compare it, not just to strength training, but other quote unquote like cardiovascular exercises like running or cycling or whatever, rowing, is rucking more beneficial? Is it similar as far as the quote unquote cardiovascular benefit?
Yeah, I would say it's more accessible just because it's low impact. So if you were to compare like walking and running, rucking's going to be closer to walking where you don't have that impact on your knees or your joints as much. So I find a lot of people, especially as they age, maybe they love to run, but their body just doesn't allow them to anymore. And rucking is a great, I think, option for that. You can start light. So if you have a walking routine already, you can throw 5, 10 pounds in a backpack and, now you're rucking. So really, I think for a lot of people that have an established walking routine, or even if you don't, it is really easy to start because I think, as you know, with strength training, there's a learning curve and sometimes it can be very intimidating to know where or how to start.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the running and the impact, and I didn't know how bad the numbers were until I read the book Born to Walk by Mark Sisson and Brad Kearns. They talk about the injury rates for runners, and it is staggering how many injuries most people deal with if they're doing like chronic running all the time, especially in running footwear that is not designed with our health in mind. It's pretty bad out there. Just have a something else that somebody can do like rucking and feel like they can get a nice level of exertion without having that type of impact must be way more beneficial.
Yeah, and I have a table in the book too where I did a 1 mile walk versus a 1 mile ruck, and all I did was throw 20 pounds on. I wouldn't recommend starting there for most people, but I like my heart rate was up 50% higher, and really I didn't change anything else but add weight. So it was relatively flat. I didn't change distance or time, and you really get again that good cardiovascular burn without really changing much.
Yeah. And when I think about a 50% increase based on where I know my normal walking heart rate would be, a 50% increase would put me right in an optimal fat burning zone. If we take the 180 minus your age formula and assume that's going to be very, very close to a maximal fat burning output, a math formula essentially, I'm assuming that's what it did to you, put you at maybe like a 5 out of 10 for exertion and put you in a much better kind of like a fat burning zone.
Right. And you get a huff and puff. I feel like it certainly like feels better. I think just, a lot of people feel like they're just walking. I'm doing like my air quotes for listeners because it just doesn't feel like enough. And this is one way to help, I think, add more challenge or add more intensity without really rearranging your day around a gym session.
Yeah, got it. Okay. You mentioned the different types, and I think it is a good idea to kind of talk about that. Weighted vests, a backpack with a bunch of rocks in it versus an actual ruck. Like, what are the differences and benefits or drawbacks to any of those?
Yeah, I'll start with a weighted vest because I think that's what I'm seeing more of online or social media. Usually, a weighted vest is going to be a fixed weight. So, oftentimes, like if you're going to scale up, you have to buy a new vest. So, I think that's one disadvantage. I will say that with a weighted vest, for anybody that struggles with balance, so if you're a little bit wobbly on your feet, so thinking like older folks, for example, a weighted vest might be a better option because it has the weight on the front and back. So if you struggle with balance, it can just help you feel more supported versus a ruck, which is actually like a backpack with padded straps. It holds the weight high and tight on your back. So it's going to hold things a little bit more comfortably. And that's going to, having the weight on your back, pull your shoulders back and you get some of those posture benefits as well. So I will say with a ruck too, you can easily swap the weight plates out. So usually it's just a cast iron rectangular plate and you can, swap out maybe 10 pounds for 20. And it's a little bit more adjustable when it comes to weight. So when you're wearing your ruck, or you could even start with like a backpack that you already have, you don't have to go out and buy anything. But as you scale your weight up, you're probably going to want something a little bit sturdy and just making sure you keep that weight high and tight on your back as well.
I was going to ask if there was a certain height where you want that kind of center of gravity. And you mentioned high and tight. Like, how high are we talking on the back?
I would say like mid back between your shoulders, and you don't want it like banging against your back. So, for example, like I've seen some really creative setups where people are using a towel or an old yoga mat and just kind of positioning things so that weight is stable too, because it's one thing to throw a couple textbooks in a backpack, but now you've got things like moving around, and then that's really going to, like stray off your gait and lead to injury as well. So having that high and tight, I would say for most people, between the shoulders, and then just trying to avoid like thinking about putting weight in a normal backpack, it's probably going to sit on your low back and you can really like start to feel that rub as well.
Okay, gotcha. And then between the balance and the posture, which you both mentioned, is there much benefit to having the weight in the front and the back simultaneously, or is it better to have just all the weight on the back?
It depends on climate, I would say too, because when you have a weighted vest, especially the ones that almost look like a Kevlar vest where they're really covering your chest, for some people that can make breathing a little bit more difficult, or thinking about hotter temperatures, it can trap heat too. So personally, I prefer a ruck just because one, I can swap plates out easily. I feel like it doesn't constrict my breathing at all. It helps posture. So that's my personal preference, but I would say it really depends on the person. I would say there's no like wrong way to ruck. I will say, like going up too fast in weight or distance, sure, you might get hurt. So that's the thing, is just kind of scaling things up slowly too, and not like letting your ego get a part of it. Because I do see like people go too heavy, too fast, too far, and now they're, out of commission.
Yeah, got it. That is a real thing. Like using a ruck, one I've used in the past had weight in the front and in the back, and breathing did feel a little bit restrictive. So that definitely is a real thing.
Was yours more like a vest where you're kind of putting in the little weights?
It was, I mean, it was the plates that you would put in,
Okay.
but yeah, it was several plates you put in the front. It was plates you put in the back. The one that I had was a combo, so it was like a maximum, I think, 50-pound one that sat, and then you could add like a 20-pound like accessory one on top of it. And I'm like you, like all or nothing. So of course, like yeah, I'm doing the full 70 and having a struggle breathing when I've never done rucking in my life. So maybe that was the issue.
Exactly, exactly. I feel like with our male listeners, that's always like, okay, you got to rein it back a little bit. Yeah.
So let's go there next. Let's talk about like the people who are interested in this and want to get started. What are some beginner kind of pitfalls besides like getting a little bit extra weight? How do people know like what they're looking for as far as shopping goes? Yeah, what are there particular features they want, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say you can start with something that you already have on hand. I, for example, used an old backpack. I wrapped a 10-pound dumbbell and a towel and threw that in there. It wasn't the most comfortable because I just wanted to prove to myself that I was going to start rucking. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. So I'm going to upgrade my equipment. I would say once you hit like 10, 20 pounds or more, then you're going to want something more stable. Again, a specific rucksack. I really like Go Ruck. They have a ton of different like sizes, and one thing that they have is a ruck plate carrier. So it's perfect for just like going around the neighborhood. All it holds is a ruck plate, so it's not like big and bulky, and that's probably the thing that I use the most. But that will have padded shoulder straps. Some of them will have a chest strap or a sternum strap so you can kind of cinch the weight across your chest. Some packs, once you get into heavier loads, will have like a hip belt, and those can help distribute weight to your hips too, because those are going to, cinching the weight to your hips is going to help translate to some of those bigger muscle groups as well, like your legs and glutes. I will say if you put on a pack and you're leaning forward, so it's natural to have a little bit of lean, but if you really feel like you're hunching over, that's usually a pretty good sign that you've got too much weight on. I would scale back, and you can always challenge yourself in different ways, like going a longer distance or really playing with speed. It doesn't always have to be about adding weight every time.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask that as well. Like, how do we know when it's time to progress? In what ways can we progress? Obviously, like you mentioned, like distances, speed, yeah, all those things, rather than just continuing to add weight. How does somebody know when they can add more weight?
Yeah, I would say if you get back from a ruck and you felt like, wow, that was easier. I didn't even know the weight was back there. I would think about distance too. So, for example, I've just been experimenting with shorter rucks, but going heavier. So, I would only change one variable at once. And there's really three things that you can change. That's weight. You can also change just your speed or distance, like how far you're covering in a certain amount of time, and then incline. And I would say that's the thing that really can ramp things up even more so than weight is if you're in a hilly area, then I might scale back on weight. But maybe that first couple rucks, I would say like not going for more than a mile or two, depending on your current fitness level, because you might notice like cricks and creaks the day after, just because that change in posture can really, add to a little bit of discomfort.
And then we're looking for the usual suspects there as well, like sore ankles, knees, hips, back, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I would say there's a difference between pain and discomfort. Like as you know, like after a good workout, you kind of feel it a little bit more, maybe that like that good hurt. For me personally, I would say I noticed like a little pinch in my shoulder just because of that, improvement in posture. Hip flexors felt a little bit tight, so it can feel good to get like a stretch in afterwards too. But I would say if you notice any like tingling or sharp pains, that's when I would take the, ruck off or, go weightless. And it's okay to just walk sometimes too.
I love that. Okay, so let's talk about footwear. What should somebody be thinking about as far as like what they're using on their feet when they're doing rucking?
Yeah, for me personally, I would say I just didn't want anything with too much squish. It really varies. I would say some people like a hiking boot, like something that's got a little bit of stiffness and it's not too cushiony, because I feel like then your kind of bones or your tendons in your feet tend to hurt either day of or the next day. So something that's sturdy. I would say thinking about the terrain that you're on too. So if you're doing trails versus pavement, you might want something that's got a little bit more grip. Go Ruck makes a rucking specific shoe called the McCall. And it took me a little bit to get used to it just because it's specifically made for rucking. So it's got a bigger toe box, but then it also has a bigger drop as well. So it's got some good arch support and it's my favorite shoe now. And I've like rucked through rivers and they dry out really quickly. So there's a ton of benefits if you know that you're going to ruck a lot to get something that's specific. But for most people, it's, a hiking boot or shoe. Some people love their Hokas or any sort of like cross trainer, but I would just avoid anything that has, again, too much squish for lack of a better term.
Well, okay, so speaking of the squish and not to bash them, but Hokas in particular, they look like moon boots. Do you see people like get injuries if they're pushing too hard on a shoe like that?
I haven't seen like that.
That shoe in particular. I will say like feet are underestimated. We just think about the mechanics of a pack or the weights, and feet oftentimes I feel like are just an afterthought, which really that's your foundation. So I would start there and really work your way up, especially if you're maybe new to walking or rucking, like get some steps, get some miles under your feet first before you start rucking just to get those good mechanics in, regardless of shoe.
Got it. Okay. And then for people that want to go the more minimalist route, do you see a lot of success with people, using, Viva Barefoots or Zeros or Earth Runners or any of those shoes that are like really, really minimal, and don't have any kind of drop?
Yeah, I would say it's personal preference. I haven't seen, I mean, a lot of times, like people who are wearing more minimalist shoe, they're probably used to it or, doing a lot of barefoot walking or things like that already. So they probably have that foot strength. For somebody that's conditioned to being in a shoe 24/7, I probably wouldn't recommend something like that.
Yeah, start out like walking around the house, or at least get just a little bit more barefoot or something, just in your day-to-day stuff before you start going a little bit more advanced.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, got it. Okay. And speaking of going more advanced, as somebody has been doing rucking for much longer, we mentioned in the introduction, advanced strategies and different things to be thinking about. What other things can people add in so that they're keeping their rucking practice, fresh and engaging and that sort of thing?
I would say new trails, like especially ones
That have elevation, those are really going to ramp things up. And you'd be surprised, like without changing weight, if you find a hill and yeah, that is really going to tax your cardiovascular system. You're going to feel that in your glutes and your legs as well. Distance is another one. So I feel like new trails, like especially longer ones, if you feel like you really have that cardiovascular base, I will say thinking about like nutrition in there too, depending on how long your ruck's in. But I think too, even signing up for a race, there's a lot of like 5Ks, 10Ks, you can ruck them. So you don't have to run, some of those other foot races. I feel like if you like to have something at the end of the tunnel waiting for you or something that you can like do with others, like doing a race, then you could always ruck something too.
Never considered that. Like, of course you could do that. If you got a group of people together who wanted to do that together, that would be really fun and engaging. Are there rucking specific competitions that you're aware of?
Yes. So GoRuck hosts a ton of events. You can look on their website. I would say they're probably, you want to have a good base for a lot of those, but they do have like more entry level, like 5Ks, for example, or like more kid-friendly events where you can bring the whole family. So I would say that their scale on events is from very beginner to, like very much like military, we're going to weed you out. And if you want that greater challenge, so that can certainly help.
Okay, gotcha. You mentioned earlier, and I agree with you, that rucking doesn't necessarily replace a good strength training program. What are some of the things that you have maybe shifted your thinking around, revolved your thinking around as far as that a good, well thought out strength training program? What should that look like for most people?
Yeah, I would say, I think we always think that we have to do more than what's really necessary. And I think really simplifying, like if you've only got a couple days a week, like make that work versus thinking you've got to get to the gym for an hour, 5 days a week. I see a lot of times where people are just setting really lofty goals and then they just don't even get started because they're feeling very daunted, I think, by even getting into a training plan like that. So I think rucking is a great base, maybe getting a couple strength workouts. Mobility is also important, I think, looking at, things can tighten up a little bit as you're using your muscles a little bit more. So always like staying limber, that's really what's going to also keep you in the game. So I think yoga is a great complement to rucking. A lot of people will attribute like faster rucking times to getting some more of those flexibility practices into. And I think, again, those emotional benefits, like thinking about taking a step back and stretching and just connecting your, movement and breathing and body can really help with the overall wellness component.
Okay. It sounds like we both have kind of gone in the same direction as far as thinking the frequency of workouts, the duration of workouts, the load needs to be like super high, 5, 6 days a week, 45 minutes to an hour each session. Like it's such a different thing when you start to think about like the intensity you're truly wanting to get to cause your body to go through a stimulus and have a response. It really doesn't need to be that frequent. It can be very challenging for sure, but you don't need to be at the gym so many days a week to be able to do that.
Right. And I don't think it's like functional. Like I think of, again, like kind of my observation of bodybuilding. It's like, okay, I'm going to do arms and biceps, or, it got very specific. And I think we kind of lose that functionality when we're training one muscle group at a time versus doing some of those compound movements as well. You're really going to be able to translate something like a squat or a push up or something that's working multiple muscle groups into everyday life as well. And I think, as you get older, a lot of times that's what really matters is like, I want to be able to pick up my kids or grandkids or get up off the floor comfortably. And, I don't really care how much I'm bench pressing, for example. Your ego tends to like slide a little bit and we think about more of, the everyday things.
Yeah. For the listener or people watching, like Kayla and I have seen so many people in their 40s and 50s and 60s who were chasing after those weight training goals. And now they really wish they hadn't because they've got a lot of issues from, that ego that you talked about and trying to lift the most weight in high school sports and football and whatever, like really comes back to bite you later in your life if you're not like careful about that.
Right. Yeah. And then you're, like you said, you're out of the game. Yeah.
Totally. Okay. So again, are there any other like muscle groups, movements? You mentioned compound movements that really help kind of complement a rucking practice. Core work, how you think about that. Does rucking take the place of your lower body lifts? Like if I'm doing rucking, am I no longer needing to do as much like leg press or deadlifting or any of that kind of stuff?
Certainly not. I would say still keep those things a part of your mix. Rucking's going to help, I think, with those muscles because you're carrying the weight on your core. You're going to translate that into your core and lower body primarily. You're also going to tighten up your back a little bit too, or I should say strengthen. But I think there's still so much benefit to training those muscle groups in particular. I feel like your big ones, I'm a big fan of like a PPL or a push-pull legs. Just because I feel like you can rotate that at the frequency that works for you. You can squeeze it into 2 days, you can put it over 5 days, and you're kind of targeting multiple muscle groups. And while one muscle group, like your muscles, for example, your shoulders, your chest, like if you're working those, the next day you're doing pull muscles, like your back, for example, you're getting, I think, good rest for those muscle groups. So I would say that frequency can be adjusted easily to a routine like that. I do kind of give some guidelines in the book as well. But specific exercises, I will say that really again the compound is going to be like your main dish, and then training some of those accessory muscles maybe depending on your goals, whether it's looking good or if it's, more functional as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's the way I would think about it as well. So I really appreciate that approach. Is there anything in the book that I haven't asked you about that you're like particularly excited about?
I would say so. I had to do a nutrition chapter, of course, but I think I really end on mindset as well. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see is with rucking is people just not doing it. And I think that's the hardest thing. It's like go find a backpack, go grab something heavy to throw in there and just do it. And I feel like a lot of people are hooked from that. Your neighbors might look at you a little bit funny the first time, but now I always joke that my neighbors like feel like they catch me when I'm not wearing my pack. They're like, "You're not wearing your pack today." So I feel like people around you start to notice, or they'll be curious about what you're doing, and that's a great way to build community too. If you're, getting somebody to go along for a ruck with you. My husband and I also started a ruck club, so just something a little bit more social where it's like, okay, we're going to meet up at this park, we're going to go for a walk, and we've had 12-year-olds to, 70-year-olds attend. So it's been really fun just to see all ages and fitness levels do it. And I think that's what I love about rucking is it's really applicable, I think, to all ages.
Yeah, no, I love that. And if somebody in your neighborhood is looking at you like you're the weird one, like it's okay in 2025 to be the weird one. If you want to go see what normal looks like, go walk around Costco and look at the average person and the health issues they're dealing with and understand that it's okay to be the weird shirtless, shoeless person in your neighborhood taking a pack around with you. That's actually a badge of honor you should be really proud of, I think.
Exactly. I love that.
Okay, so you mentioned mindset and the book, The Comfort Crisis. I think it's a really good comparison of like getting used to uncomfortable things. Can you just comment like that side of things? Obviously, that was really inspirational for you and how you got into rucking more. But how has that helped you in other facets of your life? Getting into rucking and doing it, longer with a little bit more weight. Have you noticed that it's benefiting you in other ways?
Yeah, I would say it feels good to do hard things as much as it is really hard to take that first step and actually like take the first step to get there. You always feel so good like when you challenge yourself, whether it's something in like business or life or having a tough conversation. I think just getting outside of your comfort zone, whether it's physically or mentally, we always look back and I feel like we rarely regret that. Or even if it's, a failure in a sense, we've learned something. And I always like to think that everything happens for a reason, even though we might not see it in the moment. I like that hindsight, we can, take lessons from that. And I think with rucking, for example, I was able to get those physical benefits, but again, just like getting out of my head, reconnecting with nature, the people around me, I think that was just really important to my, I would say, emotional and mental health. And I feel like you said it really shows up in other areas of life and how I show up for my clients. If I'm not taking care of me, one, I'm not being a good coach to my people, but I think people really see that as well too. And um, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I want to practice the things that I preach. So I have a sign on my office wall that says "Practice what you post," and my parents had got me that. So I try to abide by some of those practices that I say because I think a lot of times, like as fitness professionals, it's easy to say one thing and do another.
Yeah, good point. I love that phrase, by the way. That's perfect. And you wrote a book, which is apparently not that easy to do either. So I wonder if that kind of discipline Rucking carried on to actually physically sitting down and writing the book, because from everywhere out there I talk to, it's way harder than people think.
It is. And the irony, I was just talking about my husband with this. I was like, I'm writing a fitness book and I feel like I've moved the least I've ever moved in the last how many years because you're just sitting and editing and editing and editing and editing. And it's certainly a lot, but I, don't regret it in any sense. I don't know that I completely understood what I was getting into. I felt like I was going to have all this inspiration and then you sit down and you're like, wow, this is really hard work, or I've been working on this one paragraph for the last 3.5 hours. Like, what's happening?
Yeah, that's a key theme in the book, The War of Art. Have you ever read The War of Art by Stephen
Yes,
Pressfield?
my husband quit his job after he read that book.
No way. Oh, that's awesome.
Yes,
Wow.
yes, it's
Wow.
great.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
for any listener who hasn't read that, it's a really great book.
Yeah, just the idea that you're going to resist sitting down to do the day-to-day work, but it's only when you do that that you start to get, a pathway and some help and things start to flow for you. And so you've certainly done that, and I'm really, really looking forward to reading this book when it comes out, which
Yeah,
I
thank you
understand
so
is going to be
much.
very soon. It's coming out at the very beginning of 2026, correct?
Yes, you're right. It's January
Awesome.
6th.
Okay, awesome. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed this. I love, your positivity and your journey through all this, and to be able to write the book and share this with other people, I think is wonderful. So for now, where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work, and where can people go to pick up the book?
Yeah, you can find me at Kayla Girgen RD on all of the things. I would say I'm most probably active on Instagram, but I also have a free weekly newsletter, which I can give you for the show notes as well. Every Monday, I'm sending out a win the week. So maybe it's a nutrition tip, a recipe, some sort of fitness or, mindset tip. So it really varies, whatever's on my heart for the week. And then you can find the book on Amazon. If you search Ruck Fit Kayla Girgen, you can pre-order there.
Excellent. Yeah, we will link all of that in the show notes so people can find that very easily. But for now, Kayla, I've really enjoyed this conversation. We've talked about a lot of different things and covered a great distance, pun intended, with rucking. And so thank you so very much for everything you do and for your journey and for sharing that with us today. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, Kayla. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.